Tendai Mwade. Greetings, family. Thank you for checking out this video. This is a conversation that took place at the end of 2019, I believe December 2019, entitled Discussing Putting Africa First. It was hosted by Wudjau Maat of the Amun Ra Squad on his Facebook page. And it discusses many of the issues pertaining to the African identity, its role, its purpose, its function, and the idea that it has no validity or no political application in modern times. The discussion featured a number of different people. I've only featured the discussion from where I entered it, out of respect for the brothers' content, but you can find the link to the full conversation in the description to the video. Just wanted to encourage ones and ones to pre the conversation intently. Yeah, check out the details. Yeah, in the perspectives and the understanding of how and why the African identity was developed by our ancestor activists in particular, and its application in today's world. I do hope ones and ones get something from it, and I do hope that you all share your thoughts and your opinions on the conversation. Thank you and enjoy. Tenda Mwale. Abibi Fahodie, African Liberation.
ShakaRa, if you could hear me.
First of all, Rogue, Hotep, and good conversation. I just want to say though that I'd advise watching Star Wars in the order that it was released. You know what I mean?
Oh, you said
the authentic experience, bro.
The order that's released and not the
man. That's the authentic experience. You know what I'm saying? You have to get the authentic experience. You know?
Man,
you have to watch it from a new home. And then go back to Phantom Menace after you watch the first three, you know what I'm saying? But that's my personal point of view. Then you can watch it in the order that, in chronological order after that. But, you know what I mean? I think that, yeah, man, it was released that way for a reason, innit? So,
Well, yeah.
But plus, as well, a lot of people prefer the first trilogy than the second trilogy. So, you know what I mean? Quality control of these things. But, yeah, that's my personal point of view. You know what I mean? But yeah, I jumped in, ran like by accident on this conversation about maybe half an hour, 45 minutes ago. So I missed a lot of whatever was being spoken about before. But it's when you were speaking to Sean that I kind of came in the thing. First of all, I believe the group that you were talking about is the African Immigrant Caucus. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, I think that does ring a bell.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, a lot could be asked upon that because I don't really know that they have, what they are, what level they are at in terms of affecting anything at the moment.
What's the name again?
Say again?
What's the name of the name?
The African Immigrant Caucus.
Let me look to see if that's the same thing that I was talking about because I had bookmarked it. But now the reason why, let me see if this is the same thing. Let's see. I could take one look and tell you. I believe that is it. It's green. Yeah. I believe this is it.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. That's not really an essential thing about what I was going to say though. Still, my kind of contribution is not necessarily in relation to what is best necessarily or what Black Americans should do and them kind of things there. As you know, I'm not from America. I live in the UK and my family is from the Caribbean. But when we're looking at this thing, the identity of African and what it means, I think there's a lot of things to be said here, and a lot of things to be taken into consideration that I hadn't heard in the previous conversation. So I want to kind of throw them in. And hopefully, flesh out the conversation a bit more. There's context to a lot of these things. So when one says that Africa is a continent with 54 different states, the context in which those states come into existence must be taken into consideration. And also that whether the identity of African is contingent upon those 54 states. The identity of African. And when I say the identity of African, I mean the identity of African as a political and cultural designation exists before those 54 states, and in fact precedes it by at least a couple of centuries. And so we have to look at what is the context in which people began to call themselves African, and what purpose was it designed, to achieve. Now, what Brother Wudjau had said is that it's fine, it makes us feel good. It's a self-esteem boost, so to speak. I'm paraphrasing, but it doesn't have any application in the real, world. Am I representing your position correctly, Brother Wudjau?
Yeah, I probably have to fine tune it a little bit, but you're pretty much in the ballpark. But let me just add this now then. And I'm hearing a lot of feedback.
From me?
Yeah, from you. Like I hear echo.
I'm not sure why that would be.
Do you have earphones on?
No, I'm speaking right into my computer.
Okay, I hear echo.
Ask Mrs.
Pardon me?
The Facebook muted.
No, I'm not on Facebook at all.
Yes, it's an echo. But let me just try to say.
Well.
Okay, but hold on. Let me just add to it. But I'm gonna let you continue. Let me add to it. But I'm if you can mute yourself, because the echo is terrible.
Sorry.
Okay, so I'm just gonna add to it, but you can continue. So yeah, what I was that you're in the ballpark, but I just want to make a distinction just for clarify, because what I'm saying is that there's a side of action where the action takes place to affect change. And so what I'm saying is that Africa is a landmass, it's a continent, and it's not a body politic, it's not a country, it's not a nation. And so remember when Sean and I had the conversation from the beginning, in us having the discussion, we learned that we're talking about two different branches of this conversation, of pathways that the conversation can go. I'm talking on the political actionable side, and he was focusing on the historical cultural side and everything that comes in that baggage. And so we kind of differed in what we were focusing on. And now that we have identified that, we can kind of curtail the conversation to be a better conversation. So that's what I was getting at. But I want you to continue first, because when you said prior to how those 54 countries came into being, and when people start calling themselves African and so on and so forth. But I do believe we do have an African that is on the panel, so they can give their firsthand knowledge and experience from being born and raised in Kenya, and so on and so forth. So, but yeah, I don't want to stop you too long. So go ahead.
Am I still echoing?
No, you were never echoing. It's just when I was talking and now it stopped. So it stopped now. So you good?
It stopped. Okay, cool. All right. We'll give thanks. Yeah. First of all, it was my understanding that we're all Africans of the panel, but that's just me. I'm being facetious, excuse me. But yeah, so my point really is when we speak of, first of all, I do get your distinction between the cultural aspect and the political aspect. I think from my perspective, and I would argue from the perspective of the identity of African, that dichotomy is not absolute and probably false. Yeah. In the sense that there is no political institution that is not at the same time cultural, and there is no cultural modality, institution, way of life that is not at the same time political in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. Now, I believe that it would do a disservice to our ancestors to reduce what they were dealing with in terms of developing an identity, which is referred to as African, reducing it to the idea of feeling good about oneself, which is important anyway. That's essential. It's fundamental, and I'm sure that was a part of what they were trying to do. In fact, Baba Amos Wilson has an entire speech which is often referred to as feel good history, where he guards against the idea of just using history to feel good. Yeah, but he was also somebody who affirmed and encouraged us to affirm an African identity for reasons beyond feeling good. And so the purpose of the African identity is not bound by, and has never been bound by, the current circumstance that we find ourselves in. It is at once intended to be a statement of fact in terms of a shared origin and shared ancestry and a shared linkage, to a continent upon which we have built the greatest of our civilizations for the longest period in history, But it is also aspirational, in the sense of the fact that we understand that through history, we have been brought through certain experiences that have fragmented us to some degree, and presided over a degradation of those civilizations, those states, and those cultures, that we built during that time, And so we can go, throughout history, and I just deal with the last 100 years, of all the movements, that we've had that affirmed an African identity that were not based upon just feeling good. So there was once not an America. There was once not an American identity. And by the way, I'm not sure that the states in America are sovereign. If they were, then federal law wouldn't trump state law. I think the definition of sovereign would render the states not sovereign, if that makes sense.
Hold on, let me just interject, because I explained that earlier. When I said sovereign, I defined it because every state in America has limited sovereignty and limited autonomy. And so to become and to remain a member of the federal enclave on the federal level, they did have to relinquish a very small portion of their sovereignty. So I had already mentioned that.
Okay, I think that one, and there are debates. I know of debates that exist with regards to the extent to which that portion is small or not. But I take your point. I'm just not sure the word sovereign would apply to that situation.
In American law, I work as a paralegal, and so when the state and federal government has jurisdiction over certain cases, there's this concept called dual sovereignty doctrine, and so on and so forth. So we understand that here.
That would seem to make sense. I'm just saying that the state itself, if the state if there's dual sovereignty, then I'm not sure the state itself can be sovereign, if that makes sense. But because the sovereignty of the state is dependent upon the sovereignty of the wider body, which is the federal state. You know what I'm saying? That's my understanding of it anyway. But I want to debate you on that.
No. But I'm saying we're saying the same thing. I'm just explaining it. Right. when we say it in the context that I was saying it in, it's understood that there is a limitation, but the word sovereignty is still used.
Okay, all right, point taken. So yeah, my thing is that we have to take into consideration the context of these things. Yeah. So, and I don't know that it's ever been our modus operandi, to simply define ourselves according to whatever the prevailing idea of what we are is based upon other people's definitions. This is not an empowering state to be in, okay? For example, the idea that Africa is not a state and America is a state is a reality that is brought about and built upon, one, the oppression of African people, Black people in general, and two, a direct attempt by states like America to destroy any semblance of an African statehood. Yeah, so we're not just talking about an organic reality that just comes into existence as an accident of history. When we look at just like I said, just dealing with recent history, there was a significant attempt in the 1950s, 60s, through the 70s, in fact through the 80s actually, to do just that, to organize Africa into a United States, and because the situation that we find ourselves in is, by implication, war, implicitly warfare, those who we would consider enemies, i.e. the states which are referred to as the West, which the West is not a state or a body politic necessarily, an individual body politic, but a collection of body politics that act in a specific interest, no less recognizable and impacting on the world, moved, to thwart that agenda because it would negate their interest in terms of Africa and African people. So we don't just have 54 states in a continent just like that. And those 54 states are certainly not, a designation or a design by the indigenous inhabitants of that land. Yeah, this is not a reality that is defined by African people on any level, and except for, you may say, South Sudan, and even that is questionable. You know what I'm saying? So we can't just accept that Africa is 54 states with very different people, and not deal with how that reality comes about in the first place. And we also shouldn't just, accept that when, as a result of, the same people who define the state of America, the state of Britain, the state of Belgium, France, and so on and so forth, who collectively have sought to, deny the African right to self-determination on a global scale, that we should now, because these states, as a result of destroying African body politics, have built themselves up, and we have become absorbed into their nations, that the extent of our definitions of ourselves, politically speaking now, should reside within those same definitions and borders and structures. I think that would be a flawed, idea.
Okay, so Okay, so listen, so you said some good things, and I want to kind of see if I could remember and address them. So let me work backwards, because I agree with you 100% that we should definitely consider the inorganic history of how those 54 countries arised on the continent of Africa that we have today. So I'm not pushing back on that at all. So that's part of the conversation that we need to have, and at least have that education on, in terms of the British Empire, all these other countries, the Berlin Conference, and all, all that stuff that comes with that. So we definitely shouldn't leave that out. So that's that. But now, to go back to something you said was you don't see the dichotomy between the cultural side. And I assume you were talking about when I addressed Sean and our conversation, I said there's two pathways: the cultural, historical kind of side of the conversation, then the political one. And you were saying that the dichotomy, you don't feel that it exists. Now, let me clarify, because you may agree with what I'm saying. So now, culture dictates, a people's culture dictates their politics. So there is no divide in terms of mutual, exclusivity, division. There is a marriage of the two. It's no more different than your mind decides, or you decide what to eat, but your digestive system is where the action takes place. So what I was saying was that culture does dictate a people's politics, but the politics is where the action and the change can occur. That's all I was saying. So I wanted to focus on the digestive system, so to speak, a part of the human, and not just the skin and the nails and your hair. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying that they're exclusive from one another. I'm just saying my conversation was focused on where the action takes place, where people, the level where people are affected is in politics, where decisions are made. We have different forms of government around the world. Not everybody's government is set up the same as each other, but the body politic and the jural society of those group of people are the decision makers, the movers and the shakers. Okay, whether it's a kingdom, whether it's, so on and so forth. That's all I was saying. So I think I don't know if you would, after that clarification, you can understand what I was saying. So again, I agree with the how they came about. Now, where I still kind of disagree is the identity as African, even before the coming of the 54 countries as they are today, we cannot find where the people who lived on the whole continent of Africa were governed by one body, either council or solo person in terms of a king, leader, whatever the case is, or whatever the case is. We cannot find where that has occurred on the continent, even prior to the birth of the 54 countries and everything that came with that. You had differentiations between people. Me personally, I study the East African culture, Nile Valley. Even in Kemet itself, you had distinctions being made between them and between those who lived west of them, east of them, and south of them. You had Ta-Nehisi, that region, and its multiple different communities. You had the Libyans, where Libya is now today. You had those two groups, major groups, and so on and so forth. So even on the continent, even in ancient times, thousands of years ago, it was not one polity in terms of a continent. The conceptualization of a continental identity, we don't find that in the record. So now, if you have attestations or something of that, then I would love to see it. But as of what I know, as of to date, we don't have a record of that. So that's something. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't aspire to do that now. Like you said, Baba, Amos Wilson, and Blueprint for Black Power, and his lectures and stuff like that. He has made a strong case, and even Dr. Chekan Diop in his book, The Federated State of Africa, or something to that effect. They make strong arguments for that now. So I'm not pushing back on that. I'm not pushing back on the idea. All I'm saying though is that it doesn't exist right now, and that it didn't exist in the past. Now, if we bring it to fruition, like I told Sean earlier, probably prior to you coming in and start listening, I told Sean the same thing, because we brought this up too. I said, man, if we're able to form a federal level or federal enclave where the existing 54 countries, because that's what we're dealing with, if they were able to come together and form a federal level of governance, I said, man, that's a game changer. I said that would change the whole conversations. So that's where I left it. But it doesn't exist right now. Now, there's been aspirations for decades. Like you said, 50s, 60s, and even up to the 80s, there's been aspirations. But also, as you said, the West or certain other interest groups have fought against it and derailed it. Always consistently try to derail that bringing that into fruition. So I'm with you on everything you were saying. So far with what you were saying, I don't think we have any disagreement really.
All right. I do have a response, but I you did say that there's other people in the panel, so I'll give way for now.
Okay. Well, I don't know if anybody else want to speak. I wanted to bring.
Like I said, I don't mind speaking. It's just I don't want to hog the mic. So
okay, let me hold up. Let me see if Sister Emykhet wanted to chime in, because in Kenya, and I know a few people who have said to me they were an African until they actually left acting on that, in terms of even in Kenya alone.
I would like to say that, I mean, that actually holds true. And I wanted to kind of just add some different kind of perspective to what was discussed about, in regards to diminishing, the African ancestors' efforts to probably develop an African identity. And what most people will not realize is that just that whole African identity, that's a modern phenomenon. So I would definitely agree with you that if you look in the past, there's never been anything that suggests that all the different groups of people living on the African continent have had like one identity in that sense. So that is definitely a modern phenomenon, and that's why if you're on a continent, once you come out is when you actually you know, get that African identity put on you, and even just to discuss on the the whole idea of the United States of Africa or something like that. I know that most people have talked about it, but what most people don't realize, because and that should be part of the discussion as well, because that, I guess, that is something that people would like to see. But the other thing that people don't realize is that in order for something like that to happen, smaller groups, it kind of has to start from the smaller level. And you can't name any African country where people in one country actually get along. And you have to understand why everybody knows why we do have those countries. Those countries are actually, coming from the colonial periods. So these are not groups that got along probably in the past, but these are groups that were clustered together, forcefully clustered together and forced to cohabitate and identify as a nation, and which is something that they never did. And in fact, like speaking from my experience, I'm from the Luo tribe, so where you'd have my tribe actually existing within different borders around our area, being that the borders, the way they were demarcated, they just literally cut off tribes apart from each other in that sense. So even the whole idea of speaking about a United States of Africa, people have to realize first that even the smaller countries don't get along. So trying to impose that unity on a larger scale is literally like that's a dream. I would just say that's a dream, and we would like to see that, but you have to put that into consideration. And also the other thing, you have to look at it as when we do that, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to impose Western ideals? Because we know that around in America, that people identify as American. That's a whole that's a large geographical area that has united in different states. And then you have Europe, where we have all different kinds of countries, different kind of cultures. You have the Nordic people, you have people from Romania. They all have different cultures and all that, but people call them European, and they have the European Union, and that works. So are we trying to impose that on the continent as well? That's something that you kind of have to put into consideration. Does Africa actually, do all the people living on the African continent need to have the same system as other people around in these other places? Because if you look at it, do we do that to the Asian people? In Asia, we have different kind of people. We have Indian people, we have Chinese people. Are they trying to be forced to identify as Asian people? They are actually unique in their own ways. So, and on the continent, we know that the uniqueness is actually much larger. So should we even impose that? Should there be a United States of Africa? Those are the other things that you kind of have to put into consideration as well. If we do that, is it an African thing? Is it an African? Are we rooted in the Africanness of it, or are we trying to bring other other systems on the continent? And then the other thing that I wanted to actually add was that I know that I identify as Kenyan on a national level, but if you look at it, if I had to identify myself according to where my ancestors are from 400 years or 500 years back, I would take myself to Sudan. But nobody of my tribe actually says I am from Sudan. I say I am from Kenya. So I don't, so when you're talking about on a national level, you're identifying yourself with your immediate. So that's something else that, that might add a little extra help in trying to figure out how people need to identify themselves. Do you need to drop to not identify yourself as being American, because does it diminish where your ancestors are from 400 or 500 years removed? Because on the continent, nobody does that. nobody goes back 400 years. I mean, we understand that. I will say, you know, my ancestors are from Sudan, but I can identify myself as the tribe that I am. I can also identify myself as from on a national level, I am Kenyan, when I'm discussing my immediate.
So before anybody responds, I just want to highlight two takeaways. One, that the colonialism or the demarcation of these countries that we have in Africa today, it actually split up. Like a single tribe there's cases where a single tribe has been split up between borders. Like I know for Luo, as you just said, some Luo exist in Kenya, some Luo exist on the other side of the border in
Uganda and Tanzania.
Uganda. Oh yeah, Uganda and Tanzania, right? So that has occurred. And then the other thing you were saying was that even prior to that, there were groups or tribes or communities that didn't get along in the first place, even prior to all that stuff, even to this very day, or whatever the case is. So I don't think that can be ignored. So that kind of speaks to what I was saying in terms of an attestation to a historical unity of the continent, because from my study of even going into ancient East African culture in the Nile Valley, there was no such thing. Like they didn't even have a concept of a continental concept, you know. So
I think that there's a few things here. Yeah, first of all, give thanks for the contribution. There's a lot in them, and some beautiful questions were asked. Firstly, on this idea that we cannot find where Africa was governed as one body, it's not a claim that I made. I don't think it's particularly germane to the conversation, to be honest with you. I think that if we're focused on land mass, divorce from people, then we're gonna, we're kind of not getting to the crux of the history of the intention behind this thing. You know what I'm saying? The continent as a landmass is symbolic of a people group, yeah? And because land is essential in terms of independence and sovereignty, then the landmass is defined, but the central point is actually the people group, yeah, the people that we're talking about. So the continent doesn't have to have, been governed under one body for the idea of African identity to be relevant. Yeah, it's about people, social organization, economic and political organization. And I think that we focus on, as far as history is concerned, and I'm not going to go deeply into this point, I don't think it's all that important, but as far as history is concerned, yes, that we have differences. But there's also many examples of collaboration and unity and these kinds of things. And so difference has never been a universal kind of, basis upon which Africans fought wars with each other. This is not a reality that I think speaks to African history. In fact, there's been more wars between people groups in Europe, yeah, throughout history, than there has been, organically between the African people. Yet, we have Europe as it is today, and the attempts to unify Europe, still manifest themselves. Depending on how you look at history, one could argue that the attempts to unify African people and, with a power base on the continent actually predate, European Union, these kinds of things. So I'd argue that that's not an imposition, especially if you speak to people like Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah or even Kwame Ture. In fact, Kwame Ture has an analysis of history that suggests that prior to colonialism, it was the trajectory of African civilization was to move from smaller group aggregates to larger group aggregates. Yeah. In that kind of way, and that colonialism was an interruption in that process. Sheikh Anta Diop doesn't just speak about organizing Africa as a federal state, in terms of aspirations, the foundation of his argument is that there is cultural unity in Black Africa. He writes a book to that effect, and the book that you're referring to, Brother Wudjau, Black Africa, the full title is The Economic and Cultural Basis for an African Federated State. Yeah, so one defines the fact that there is economic benefit in this thing, and the other defines the fact that there is actually cultural foundation for this thing. And it just so happens that when we're looking at our culture and our people groups, even how we define ourselves as people groups, a lot of the what we will use, naturally to define ourselves and develop the evolution of our civilization has been impacted, and some has been robbed via the colonial process and the enslavement process. So I always find it interesting that African becomes a problematic terminology for our people, but yet when it comes to the 54 states, on the continent, people seem to have no problem defining we have no problem defining ourselves, and I say people, Africans in general, because coming from the so-called Caribbean experience, the same thing exists. We have, like, all of these colonial constructs are created, and we define ourselves according to them. Just knee jerk, you know what I'm saying, without contestation. Yet, when it comes to African, there appears to be, some problem, even though the idea of African is no more a social construct, or no less a social construct than the idea of being a Jamaican or being, South African. You know what I'm saying? So we have to look at why that is, and what defines that. But the essential point is that if we're looking at it properly, I overheard the end of last year, I took part in a conference called Re-Engaging Pan-Africanism. I spoke at the conference, but there was a sister who spoke she's from Nigeria. She's a professor at the University of Bristol over here. And in her presentation, she was talking about decolonizing Africa. And she was talking about, actually, part of the process in her mind was decolonizing even our ideas of the self, our concepts of who we are and how they're constructed. And she attacked the idea of tribe, and said that the word tribe is an anthropological term imposed upon Africans by European so-called scientists, and it has become used, by Africans ourselves to define our own reality. When if we look at it, the two things don't really add up. If we was to apply the term tribe, its denotations and connotations with the organic development of African history, it wouldn't apply. There's another elder by the name of Kwesi Pra, who's a linguist and a cultural scientist, and he has a book called, forgetting the full title, but it says something about African anthropological realities or something like that. And he talks about the fact that one of the things that happened during colonialism was that you'll find people groups, and so-called chiefs were installed by colonizers, and a tribe was actually just artificially created. This happened in places like Sudan and other places. You know what I'm saying? Whereby you have a group that has a clans within it, and then through the colonial process, each clan is made into a tribe. But more importantly, we can identify the derivation of language systems. When we talk about this Tower of Babel, that Africa is supposed to be, with all these different language systems of groups that don't get along, and so on and so forth. Oftentimes what we're actually dealing with is languages that have a shared origin, which indicates a shared culture, at least at some point in history. So I think my point in saying all of that is just to say that we have to look at, we have to examine our ideas of African history. If we're going to use the history argument to thwart the idea of an African identity, even the history that we're using may need examination in that regard. Finally, the idea the idea that African is a modern idea doesn't make it any less relevant or valid, in my humble opinion. But I want to just touch on this thing about politics, being where the change is made. And I'd agree with that to a significant degree. But I don't reduce politics to the current demarcations and designations of a state. Yeah, politics is more than that. Politics takes into consideration people activity, and there are movements towards. Before there was an America, there was a war for independence, and that move itself was political. Yeah, so the politics were in play long before the nation of America came into being. So if we, politically speaking, apply our energy, and our definition to the identity of British, let's say, for example, let's use my own present circumstance, then my activities will be confined by the electoral system over here. And if I have a black focus, then wouldn't really go beyond gaining certain rights, for black people in this country. And to a significant degree, depending, and this is actually, it tends to play out in terms of my understanding of history, what we tend to do is devote our energy to the development of the colonial state in which we live, rather than the destruction of the colonial state in which we live. And that has implications for what we call African sovereignty, and so the political application of the identity of African relates to this idea of African sovereignty. So if politics is where the change, takes place, then the only real question is, what change are we looking to take place? So there is the identity of African is not any less applicable to a political situation because there is not a United States of Africa. All it means is that the political activity associated with African is, what do we need to do to develop that? And I'm not even sure that a United States of Africa is necessarily a terminology that I'd use. I question it a lot of time, but that's another section for another time. My only point here is that political activity is not reliant upon the existence of a state. There are many movements and revolutions throughout history that are themselves political, and those movements bring states into existence. So when we say that it will be good if it happened, or it would be wonderful if it happened, or it would be a game changer if it happened, that if, is a problematic word for me, coming from my perspective. The question is, how do we make it happen? What is the process by which we make it happen? And more fundamentally, the identity of African has been a key central dynamic factor among those who intend and have done work in making that happen. So we cannot reduce that to, wanting to feel good and these kinds of things.
Okay, so real quick, and I think we have two more people that chopped on. Give them a chance to speak. Man, I was supposed to shut this down at 2, but we're gonna keep on going because the conversation is unfolding. But I wanted to point out a couple of things because I always like to point out what I agree on and then where I may part ways with, because a lot of times we agree with each other and we don't realize it. But I want to back up to Diop and Amos Wilson, or at least Diop. And so remember, just to clarify again, because I choose my words carefully. I was saying that Diop and both Diop and Wilson laid a good foundation and argument for the unity of Africa. And Diop, as you correctly said, his stance, or what he sprung off of, was the fact that there was cultural unity, and he identified that cultural unity in different ways. One of it being language. And so I'm very familiar with that, and even some work after Diop, some improvement on that part of it with Diop. But now on the issue of language, we have to understand the difference between diachronic analysis and synchronic analysis, because although when you diachronically analyze languages and group them in their genetic families, you're going backwards in time in chronology, and then synchronic analysis, you're dealing with a certain period of time. And so we have to understand that difference, because although we can trace several sibling languages back to an ultimate parent, or, not, I'm not saying ultimate, but a parent. And then, of course, while that parent existed, then we can assume, and most of the time correctly so, that there was a cultural unity or cultural parent among those now disparate languages that came about afterwards. But in real time, there was not a time when there was just one. So even the language route will defeat the argument of this notion of this conceptualization of this single African. And when I said it earlier, I was definitely not talking about landmass. The continent of Africa is already unified as geographical elements. Like they're already unified. So I was talking about people. So I was never talking about the land when I made the comment about in history we will not find in the record a time when Africa was united. When I said Africa, I was definitely talking about the people, not the continent. The continent has been unified for quite some time in terms of a landmass. So that was that, just to offer clarification. But I wanted to say that the politics piece, we can describe many different activities as political. And the point I was making is that the difference between, as I said earlier, culture, a group's culture and its elements, what we call culture, because culture is not just this one thing, it's made up of elements. The elements that make up culture, that together dictates a people's politics, because politics is policies that are agreed upon for civil administration, for lack of a better or formal definition. And so culture does dictate a people's actions in their politics for their civil administration of themselves. But what I was saying is that where the action actually takes place is in politics, no matter what we call it. And so the requirement for statehood is not necessary for politics in general. So I want to make that clear. So I agree with that. But the change and the level of change that's necessary in this conversation, what I was talking about with Sean earlier, when it comes to African Americans and so on and so forth, is at the level of statehood or at the federal level in that politics. That's what I was making clear. So when we were talking, I'm very surgical in what I'm focused on and what I'm saying, without eliminating other things. So I'm aware of politics being what it is, but I was speaking about specific actions or at the level of where these actions have to take place. So I gave the analogy of the human body. We decide what we eat, we decide when we want to cook it, but where that action of digestion takes place is in the digestive system. So if I wanted to address change on that level, I have to address the digestive system. I'm not going to address whatever, whatever case, I got to do something with that. So same thing with what I was saying with politics. So I'm just being a little bit more high resolution and detail, drilling down into the type of politics that's necessary for African Americans here in this country. That's what the conversation was all about. That's where we started. African Americans. Not the global identity. We were talking about African Americans and so on. Then the last thing I wanted to say was that war not being caused from differences. You made that point, and I agree that not all wars are just fought just because people are different. In terms of, when we say different, in terms of because they may speak a different language or because they look different, wars are not generally caused because of stuff like that. They're disagreements on some other things, interest, and some different levels. So I concede to that, and I never made anything statements contrary to that. But what you said that I agree with, and what I said still supports, and what Sister Emykhet was saying, it still supports the fact that Africans, the people on the whole entire continent, still didn't get along for whatever the reasons are. Not because they're different or look different, but whatever the reasons were, there was tension and there was conflict on the continent among the continental people that we call Africans as a whole. There were differences there, and so going back to what I was saying, it would be a game changer and just not a deal breaker, a deal maker, if we could today unify all of Africa as Diop outlined and so on and so forth. But Emykhet brought up a good point. Is that African though? And when she said that, it brought up a side point that it would be to do that from an outside perspective. Now, if people within the several different countries that exist today organically do it on their own out of necessity because we're in a state of war and et cetera, then it's pressured by the environment, and that's social evolution. That's going to be a natural or organic thing. But if it's pressured from outside or whatever, then is it really different than when colonialism took place, to force something that's not organically done from the outside inward instead of from the inward going outward? And so that's that. Not to say that's happening, but I'm saying that has to be taken into consideration as well. And see, this is where these other countries get involved. And like you said, they even invent kings. they invent installed people. They invent and they corrupt governments over there. And we know that governments and certain positions of administration is corrupt over there in the various different countries that exist today. So it opens the door for that. So we got to keep us in mind. So that, this is a long conversation that we could probably keep on drilling down and talk more and more and more about. And people probably already did talk about these things. So anyway, I think that's all I wrote down that I wanted to address. Let me just quickly say African Americans. Yeah, I just want to point out we were talking about African Americans. Oh, last thing. Shared origin and ancestry. Now we have to be careful with that. Not to say that's wrong, but when we say ancestry, like I was pointing out way in the beginning of our conversation, is that it depends on what level that we're dealing with, because scientifically or biologically, every human on the planet can claim African ancestry. So we're obviously not talking about on that level of shared ancestry, because even Europeans have a shared ancestry with people who don't call themselves Europeans or are not identified as Europeans on that level. So shared ancestry should come with some explanation when it comes to that. And so what I was saying earlier, to avoid all that kind of talk, was the fact that all humans are humans. All humans living today are Homo sapiens sapiens, but yet we don't call ourselves all the same thing. We differentiate each other based on certain criterias, and these criterias are distinctions, whatever they may be, but they're distinctions to give an identity, and that comes under the umbrella of identity. And so whatever criteria forms an identity, and then a label is thrown on of it, then that's what we have today. So as African Americans, we separate, or we identify ourselves with this common shared experience called the transatlantic slave trade. That's our unifying experience that springboards or brings forth an identity, and we just label that right now, and the consensus is that we know right now we're calling ourselves African Americans, but that's what that is. That's what that points back to. The result, we're on this side of the transatlantic slave trade or the Holocaust. So we have that in common. and that's what's meant. So we you know, in the earlier conversation, we, you know, kind of fleshed that all out and everything. So anyway, that's pretty much all. But I know we have somebody else, Blak Panther brother Ben. If you want to
Hey,
get in
peace.
and say
Everybody
something,
hear me?
yeah.
Yeah.
Peace to everybody on the panel. Lafayette Mandela, Biffy Wudjau, everybody watching. I kind of came late in the game. It's my day off, so I wake up extremely late on purpose. So excuse my tardiness. I was really listening to what the brother was saying before you, Brother Wudjau, and I was listening to your explanation as well. I don't know if this has already been said, and you kind of alluded to it when you were talking, but if we want to change or make any modifications to nationality, first we're talking about obtaining something we don't really have right now, which is political power. Because a lot of people do not get to name themselves. I don't think that our Native Americans settled on American Indian as a nationality. That was something that was given to them. Just like in the 60s, they started out calling us Afro Americans. And then it just kind of transitioned to African Americans. We didn't vote on that. We did. I mean, there was no, you know, town hall meeting across the country and saying, well, what do we want to call ourselves? Nobody did that. It was decided for us. So any modifications to our current nationality, we're going to have to obtain some type of strong political power in certain areas to push that to where it can be modified. Currently, based on my analysis, we do not have that. That's something that we're going to have to develop and you know, apply constant pressure to achieve, if that is what, you know, the direction that we as African Americans want to move towards. And there can be arguments made for, you know, both sides, but the key thing to me is understanding what nationality is and not look at it in racial terms, because the two are separate. A lot of people confuse them. You can have a nationality from any country in the world and be a completely different race, and the two don't have to coincide or coincide. You know, that's just something to keep in mind.
Hey, oh, sorry. Let me just quickly ask the panel something real quick. Because listen, this conversation started with me and Sean in an inbox, and
that's how they always start.
Yeah, and I told Sean that, man, we should because I didn't feel like typing a bunch of things anyway. I said let's come into Zoom. I said, well, wait, we might as well go live. And, you know, people chime in, and that's what unfolded. But, man, we've been on here for 3 hours and 25 minutes total. And so what I want to ask y'all, because this is a good conversation, and I like engaging conversation like this. I don't like the, you know, the adversarial environment. See, this is how conversations, to me, should unfold. But it's just time, and it's late. And so what I want to ask you all, if y'all don't mind, let's if y'all could remember, you know, what the things we talked about. And I don't know how well it archived, because it kept saying the live broadcast is interrupted, whatever. But if you have to, you know, see some of these points to go back, you can in the video, obviously. But let's pick up another time and kind of you know, same people I will just announce, you know, whatever, and we just kind of, you know, pick up and just chime in on the conversation again. I'm only saying that because it's definitely, it's 3:00 in the morning here where I am, and I gotta definitely shut it down. Otherwise, I would talk to y'all for 5 more hours. But yeah, I need to shut it down. And it's a good conversation, but I at least want to give y'all the opportunity to let me know if y'all are down with that. If, you know, I try to give y'all a notification, we could do it again. It just, kind of remember the things we were talking about. When I have these conversations, I always have me a scrap paper around me or a notepad, and I write down different bullet points and date it and then title it. So I'll pick it back up and I can kind of refresh myself and we can get it popping again. Conversation, because this is good conversation. And like I said, I like to state what I agree with, and I clarify, because sometimes I think that we two people agree even if they don't think so immediately, but then the agreement's still there, and then I show where we part our ways and we could flesh it out and stuff. So that's good. But I do want to end it. It's 3:05. So how y'all feel about that? I'll try to notify y'all some kind of way we could pick back up, or we can continue the conversation.
Yeah, I'm good with that, bro. I jumped out my bed for this conversation, so it was about 6 o'clock when I got up. So yeah.
Oh, okay. So, but Ben, I think if you had one more point, you can go ahead and then I'll just close it out.
Okay. It was something Sister Emykhet said, about the unity of Africa, and is that really African in terms of tradition or cultural or how we move, or I would say no, it isn't. Not historically, but there's something you said years ago, Wudjau, that has always kind of stuck with me, and that is the idea of functional unity. And I totally agree with functional unity, and that's unification with a purpose, not unifying just to say we did it, not unifying just for feel good, but having a purpose and a mission statement. And in that spirit, Africans have been doing that in different points in history. So if we were to attempt or unify Africa, it would have to be well thought out mission statement, plan. The battle plans would have to be drawn up. This is, for a specific purpose. And when we achieve this certain mission, we can reassess from there. But given our current condition, I suggest functional unity as a option to move forward.
All right, that's a good note to kind of bring this conversation to a close, man. I really enjoy these conversations. Like I said, it started off with just me and Sean, and then June chimed in, and then who else? Unbiased Sports. He probably asleep right now. Oh, he's still up. Hey, Unbiased. A side note, man. Listen, every time I see you live, you are snacking on some chips, some popcorn, something, drinking some something. You it's like you are forever snacking. I'm surprised. I'm surprised you don't have it now. I'm surprised you don't have, you probably look it down.
I eat once a day, so I snack, so I don't gotta eat again. You dig?
Oh, okay. Yeah. But all right, I enjoyed the conversation, man, and ladies and gentlemen. And I want to do this again, not on just this topic, but like I said, my thing it's always been, I want to change the narrative of conversations. Everyone knows me. I do not like the way that these topics have been engaged in an adversarial, confrontational environment that we like to call debating, but it's really fussing. I don't, I know what real debates look like. And I have not seen one of those yet, to even call it that. But it's just to our detriment. I mean, it's good for entertainment and all that kind of stuff, But in the long run, I'm not supportive of it in terms of the long run. So I'd rather have these conversations. So this is where you'll find me engaging different people on different topics. Or if I see other people doing it, I'm gonna jump in. I'm gonna jump in and chime in and stuff. So anyway, But yeah, so we'll do it again, and I'll announce it. And I call this discussing putting Africa first with Sean, because that's what we start off in the inbox. And so I don't know. I'll keep the title here, but we'll have a part 2. Just keep on going from what we were talking about. But I think it was a good input. So I appreciate everybody's input, and all that good stuff. So I want to say, Shimon Hotep, I'm gonna shut it down. So Everybody enjoy the rest of their night. And I know over the seas, y'all starting y'all day, so have a good day. All right then. So peace.
Peace.
Okay, I think I am still on Facebook Live, so I'm gonna shut down Facebook. So I appreciate all 15 million people that tuned in on my spur of the moment. So that we're at Comfort Onyi. Yeah, I read your comment, and if you just heard what I just said, the unfolding of this conversation was not planned. You know, it was on the spot. So I know you said that I didn't forewarn anybody on an upcoming discussion or anything like that, but that's how these transpire. So what I try to do is when I go live like this, I immediately put the link out so people can come and participate. And so that's the whole point. So hopefully you saw the link and maybe you didn't have time or whatever to come in, but that's how these conversations unfold. All right, so just want to make sure I address that. All right, but anyways, say peace to everybody, and really appreciate anybody who's tuned in. All right, peace.